Welcome to the Ellevate podcast, conversations with women changing the face of business. And now your hosts, Kristy, Wallace, and Maricella, Herrera.
Hello and welcome to the Ellevate podcast. This is your host, Kristy Wallace, with my co-host, Maricella Herrera. Maricella, what's going on?
Well, I have decided to multitask, so I am talking to you and knitting at the same time.
I love that you are knitting. Is that a new habit for you? Or is
it's a completely new thing, but I've found that it's, I don't know, these like very mechanic, just repetitive movements do calm my brain. So it's become my break, like my little short breaks during the day are for knitting lately.
I think I've told you this story, I'm not sure, but Cecilia Nelson, who's a dear friend of mine, she is now the lead in our New York City chapter. She is a phenomenal diversity and inclusion professional through L'Oreal and a lot of the work that she does. I met her years ago through a prior company, and she taught me how to knit.
Really?
She did, and I remember meeting up with her and getting yarn and the needles, and she was teaching me. And if you follow her on social media, you see she knits everywhere. You know, she'll be on a plane, she'll be at a restaurant, she'll be traveling. Wherever she is, she has her knitting and she knits. And I tell that story in part because it connects to what you're doing right now, but also just as a reminder to all of us that we leave a mark on people in this world, and I don't know if we always notice that or realize that. Cecilia was just showing me how to knit many years ago, but I remember it. I remember it distinctly as someone who was sharing their passion with me, was teaching me something new, was building a connection with me outside of professional life, which is how we knew each other. And I'll always hold that memory of her, of how she spent that time and effort to teach me something new. And it's pretty spectacular.
I love that so much. Yeah, we all make little marks in each of our lives, and that is really, really special.
Yeah, well, it is. And today's guest, Rebecca Weaver, is honestly hoping to do the same thing. She's the founder and CEO of HR Uprise, and as a former HR professional herself, saw so many times when the relationship between employees and HR professionals didn't always work out, when employees didn't always feel supported by their companies, didn't have the tools and coaching at the ready to navigate some of those tricky situations. So Rebecca founded HR Uprise to provide the coaching and the support for people in the workplace to be able to move forward, to overcome challenges and obstacles, and to build a better relationship with the employee experience. Well, let's get to my conversation with Rebecca. Hello, Rebecca. Welcome to the Ellevate podcast.
Hi, Kristy. Thanks so much for having me.
I will give a shout out to Nicole Case, who introduced us. So I always like to call that out because I think it's important we reinforce the power of connections.
Absolutely.
Would you mind sharing with our listeners a little bit about you and your story?
So I have about 20 years of HR experience. That has been most of my career. And I am the founder and CEO of HR Uprise, which is a company that we're working to create HR that works directly for employees rather than the company.
And what led you to start the company?
So it was really in the wake of Me Too. It's just conversations reemerging a few years ago. And, I was looking back at both my own personal experiences as a woman working in the business world. I certainly had plenty of stories pretty much every woman that I know. And I was understanding those with new language, with kind of a new lens. But I was also looking back at it as an HR professional. And, I started to ask myself, how many times have I been a part of this system that has allowed racism, sexism to really take root within the workplace. And it was especially that latter part of the conversation that I just didn't see enough happening. And so I found myself with a lot to say and decided to launch this Instagram account because it just seemed like there were some organizations that were doing some grassroots work that seemed really interesting to me. And they were doing it on Instagram. So I started there. And that was the entire plan, was just to, hey, I need an outlet for all of this that I have to say. And it totally exploded, especially in the very beginning. And so it was clear to me that the message was finding an audience. But what was really interesting is I was talking directly to HR, about all the ways that we need to get our act together and do things differently. And from the very beginning, I started hearing from non-HR people, the employees, and they're reaching out, asking questions like, I was asked to sign an NDA. What should I know? Or I found out that I make a lot less than my male counterparts. Is there anything I can do about that? It was questions like that I realized, these are the kinds of questions that people need access to. But with our traditional system, the way that HR is typically structured, we've really been in what I call the double bind of HR, which is this desire to both be there for the employee and the organization. But the problem is, if ever there's a conflict between what's best for the employee and what's best for the company is going to win out every single time. And so over the past couple of years, since first launching that Instagram account, we've gone through a few iterations, but now what we do is provide direct access. We have an amazing network of coaches who have an HR or an HR related background, so talent acquisition, benefits compensation, that type of thing. And they provide coaching. They're available directly to employees. So the magic is that we have removed that double bind, removed that obligation to the company, and now provide that support directly to employees.
Yeah, and I think that's so important. I mean, as we've seen, particularly over the past couple of years, is the fact that many employees feel like they don't have a place to go, and they don't know what to do or who to trust when they need support or when something arises. And so, creating a space for that trust and that support can really help many of these individuals navigate those times. In your Instagram account or in the work that you do, without giving away confidentiality, were there any stories that really resonated with you?
Yeah, there have been so many. People reach out, and a lot of times it's people who are marginalized in some way within the workplace. But reaching out saying, this is what I was experiencing at work, and I've just never had anybody to talk to about it. Or, my goodness, I had no idea that, I had these rights within the organization or, as an employee. I had no idea that I could ask these questions. And so we hear that a lot. I would say more than anything, what I hear are stories from people who say that they feel that they were burned by HR or burned by the system. And that is, again, I think it's really a function of the system that's in place and what we're really working to fight against.
What advice, so I want to look at that kind of both sides of this equation here. What advice do you have for HR professionals in terms of how they can work to create an environment? I mean, it's a loaded question, right? Because this is nuanced. It's, an environment where there is equity, equality, safety, lack of harassment. I mean, there's many issues here. But what steps should they take, to really put their themselves in the shoes of the employee and to create progress within their organization?
Yeah, I love this question. For HR, my message to them is, first and foremost, I think we need to do a lot more internal reflection. I think we need to have a hard look internally about the structures that are in place, about the policies and practices that we have in place. Certainly the past year has driven the point home more than ever before that, what we used to think of as the quote unquote ways of working, right, or good company practice, really are damaging to so many people. Or the things that we used to think were not possible. All of a sudden, for example, you have millions of people working from home when it used to be considered a perk or, something extra that we would give to someone who needed it, rather than thinking about ways that, our employees can integrate their work and life. Now, what we're hearing from employees overwhelmingly is that they want to continue some aspect of this flexibility. And so how do we do that? So back to my message for HR. I think we need that internal reflection. I think we need some of that reckoning and some of that, honestly, the deep soul searching. How many ways have I been a part of the problem? How many ways have I personally, and then I as an HR professional, my role within the system, how many ways have I been a part of that? And it takes a lot of humility to be able to have that conversation. And that's just something I don't see nearly enough within HR right now.
It's complicated because we, we do live in a place where I think it's like you come in, you keep your head down, you do your work, you maybe are, let down by, the inability to create impact. I think, I've heard from so many, especially in like the D&I space, who kind of come in, can't wait to create change, can't wait to do things, and then find themselves in, just as you're talking about, Rebecca, these, structures and systems that have been around forever that are strong and unyielding, and it is hard to create change when there's no space for it.
Absolutely. It's going to be uncomfortable. I mean, I think that is something that we just need to accept. And again, we've all had a lot of practice in being very uncomfortable over the past year. But I think it's really necessary. It's, as I'm working with companies, they're looking at what's our return to office policy going to be, or what's our plan. And they're asking a lot of questions, but are we asking the right questions? Are we asking about, let's break it all the way down? This is not a return back to normal. This is how do we create something better going forward? We were all forced, I think, into this really kind of breaking us all the way down to the studs. And when you look at companies and how we function, I think we need to be willing to just completely rebuild. How do we maintain the flexibility that, again, a huge percentage, mass percentage of employees say that they want to continue with, and yet still provide some of that connectivity that is so important to doing great work? How do we provide psychological safety for people? How can we be truly more inclusive from the start? And how do we just make that function of what we do going forward? It really is a different way of operating, and it will be uncomfortable for people because it's different, but it needs to be. It has to be if we're going to be successful, I think, moving forward.
Yeah. And then what about employees, right? So this is, as you're talking, this is such this key moment of, where do we as an organization go moving forward? What does that look like? How do we make these business decisions that have, a multitude of impact? Everything from productivity to costs and expenses, turnover, recruitment. I mean, it's across the board. But then employees, how do we ensure we're hearing their voice and their perspective as HR leaders or as business leaders? And, to also acknowledge that not everyone in the workforce feels the same. There's a lot of nuances. Some people, I've been having this conversation with business leaders, some want to return full time, some don't want to, some want the flexibility and the freedom, but then inherent within that is a lot of challenges if you're a caregiver, or if you, have a long commute, or, And then are we creating stigma? Are we then now creating new ways to marginalize people because of the choices that they're making?
Right, exactly. I mean, that is a truly inclusive workplace, provides space, and is welcoming, not just tolerant, but welcoming of all of those possibilities. And no, that is not easy. But that is really truly what we all should be building moving forward. Making space for the caregiver who says, like, well, yeah, sure, I'd love to come back to the office, but my kids aren't going to be back in school until the fall, maybe. Or, the person saying, yeah, I'm caregiving for my parents who are now ill and need round the clock care. Or the, hey, I don't have dependence, but I would just really love to engage in rock climbing because that's a passion of mine and that fuels my creativity. I mean, there's so many different ways that we can provide. Again, I think really the key moving forward is going to be flexibility. It's going to be there is not just one way to do this, but that we're being intentional in how we schedule meetings, and how do we make sure that people who are joining by Zoom, and are also in person have an equal opportunity to contribute and are welcomed as part of the conversation. There's just so much that we need, but I really think it's that flexibility, and that agility. It's an agile response, and plan that's going to be required.
Yeah, I hear you, and I agree. I just I think partially as a business leader, like flexibility is kind of nails on a chalkboard because you're trying so hard to like create an environment that especially if you have a large organization, like how do you then ensure that all managers are having that degree of flexibility, and are there any guardrails, and how are you communicating that down? And some of the lack of progress we've seen, particularly within D&I, has been because companies, with especially larger organizations, and I know you have a lot of experience with this, it's easier to kind of have big buckets, like how do we support the women in our organization? And the reality is that's the wrong, that's you're going in too high, because within the women within your organization, Black women have different experience than LGBTQ AI, or than, the Latino women, or, within different business units or geographies. And it's so nuanced that you have to go, peel back the layers and really be intentional about, the intersectionality and the impact across the board.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's why an intersectional approach is so critical. Understanding all of those layers and understanding how, every single employee that you have is bringing some of those, is bringing their identity. I tell coaches and our clients, there's no such thing as leaving it at home. And again, that is a lesson we have learned this past year more than ever. To be really cognizant and, making plans and intentional around the understanding of all that we have all been experiencing. It's not just employees, but every single one of us, every manager in your organization, every executive has been living with this additional kind of weight of the experience of the pandemic, and whether that's health concerns for themselves or family members, maybe they've lost family members to COVID. The concerns about, everything that we do still takes so much additional effort, whether it's going to the grocery store, the things that we used to take for granted, most of us, it just takes additional planning, and there's a weight to all of that. And I think recognizing that for employees is really critical. What I tell leaders, the key in my mind is really creating guidelines, not policies. And that's, again, I think the mindset shift that we need leaders to get to is, it's guidelines. It's give people a framework and then allow them to make decisions. It's pushing accountability down to the lowest levels within the organization, giving people the freedom to make good decisions, give them guardrails, give them the guidelines for how to make those good decisions. But that is, again, that's the flexible workplace of the future.
And then let's switch sides to employees. So I know you do a lot to support employees and give them that advice and that coaching, as they are looking towards the future and towards their careers. And what advice, what are the big themes you're seeing coming out? And what advice do you have for employees who are trying to, create that work environment that works for them?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're hearing a lot of interest in job search, as you might imagine. There are a lot of people who are either currently searching for a job or planning to search for a job within the next 6 months. And I've seen some studies recently that, upwards of a third of employees anticipate changing jobs in the next year. So that is a statistic that I think we should all be paying attention to. And it's for a variety of reasons. It's either, return to office plans are not what employees are looking for. There's not enough flexibility for them, or their workplace is just no longer supporting their career goals, that type of thing. So our coaches are really able to give them a wide variety of help. I mean, certainly there's always the question about, is my LinkedIn profile, or do I need a resume? Are there ways that we can improve those? But then we can also help people with interviews. So practicing interview questions, for example, as somebody who's spent their career doing interviews, how do I talk about why I left my last job, and working through some of those challenging things. So there's lots and lots of those. So that's kind of one big theme that we certainly are hearing a lot about. The other theme is really the kind of conflict at work. So either my boss is a jerk, or my coworkers, I'm having trouble dealing with a challenging coworker. That's another big theme that we hear about as well.
To kind of bring it back to how this conversation started around, Me Too, and, but I mean, there's, obviously sexual harassment, there's microaggressions. I mean, there's a number of situations that many of us find ourselves in the workplace where maybe we question, like, is this wrong? Is this okay? Am I overthinking it? I don't know. And I'll be honest, I've had so many conversations over the past couple years with people who are doubting, and, I'm curious for you. I mean, how do we just trust in our instincts, right? I mean, to know, okay, if you're feeling there's something like, but is there a way, do you validate it? I just don't know. I never know what advice to give someone. Like, what's the next step there?
It is probably one of the most common questions that I get when I talk to people who are doing it. It's this question of, is this harassment, or is this discrimination? And, we can certainly work through that, but that's not even always the right question to ask. The question of harassment discrimination is a legal question, really. There's a legal definition of that. And the problem is that legal bar is set so high that, yes, there are plenty of things that reach that definition, but then you still have the question of, well, what do I do about that? Is it worth it to engage with an attorney? Is it, what kind of damage, would I recover? Because that's ultimately the question that you're looking at with a private lawsuit. There's all this other stuff that happens on a day-to-day basis that may not reach that really high legal bar, but it's the stuff that I say, like, this stuff just still isn't okay. Like, it's not okay. If your boss is a jerk, it may not be illegal, but it's still not okay. It's making your life miserable, or it's keeping you from, being able to grow your career. And so that is really, it's all of that other area that I really created HR Uprise to help fill and give people resources to work through that stuff. It is a challenge because our legal system has not caught up and is not set up to help with those kind of day-to-day things that, can, whether it's microaggressions that really are not so micro, or whether it's I just don't know how to communicate what it is I'm doing. I need to decide, do I stay in this job or do I try and find another one? All of those things. But that really truly is why I created HR Uprise in the first place, is to deal with all that other stuff that may or may not be illegal, but is still just not okay. It's not okay.
Oh, that's excellent. And I love hearing about turning your passions into impact and creating businesses around that and supporting others. So thank you, Rebecca, for all that you do. I wanted to end with a quick lightning round to get to know you a little bit better. I'm going to ask you some questions and ask that you just respond in a few words. So are you an introvert or an extrovert?
Extrovert, for sure.
What is your favorite day of the week?
Ooh, I think maybe Thursday. It's maybe the most hopeful day of the week.
In what way?
Because it's almost Friday. But you still, we're still a work day. And quite frankly, I love the work that I do. But I don't know. I find myself to be like maybe the most productive on Thursdays somehow.
Excellent. What are you, an early bird or a night owl?
Well, I was a night owl till I had children. And now, and then I haven't slept in years.
My children, we all actually are going to struggle once we go back to working in an office and all that stuff, because my kids love to sleep. So we don't get out. I mean, we sleep probably much later than others, but yeah, we used to be like up and moving in the morning, and now I think we stay up a lot later at night just to have family time and stay connected. So who would be your dream dinner guest?
Ooh, Maya Angelou. She is just an absolute hero of mine. Read I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings many years ago. I actually was introduced to her when she did the poem for Bill Clinton's inauguration, and then learned so much about her, and just so wise. And there's so much I would want to ask her.
She is fantastic. Do you have any pet peeves?
Inappropriate use of apostrophes.
You're not checking my 12-year-old's homework.
Right. Yeah. That and inappropriate use of quotation marks. I see it in advertising everywhere.
Does that include air quotation marks too?
Possibly.
What is your Monday morning staple? What do you need to get your week off to the right start?
This is going to sound awful. Diet Coke. I don't really drink coffee, but I'm still really hanging on to that Diet Coke addiction. So it's so delicious.
We used to have Diet Coke in the office, and I never have it at home. But yeah, every time like mid-afternoon when I needed to pick me up, I'd be like, Diet Coke.
It just hits the spot, doesn't it?
Yeah, I miss it. What has been your favorite recent read?
Ooh, I've read some really good books lately. Well, the one that comes to mind immediately was Alicia Keys' biography, or her autobiography. Memoir, I guess, is maybe a better way to describe it. But it's just absolutely fantastic, to read about her life experience, and she just incorporated so much of her learnings and what she has learned over the years while telling her story. It's just an awesome read.
All right, I'm going to add that to my list. What is your top self-care practice?
Ooh, definitely going for a walk outside. Just have to get outside. I have to breathe the air. Ideally, we live in the Seattle area, so my ideal practice is to go walk in the forest so that I can breathe the trees, or walk by the beach. We have the beach close by as well. and hear the waves. There's something very, very healing about waves crashing.
I grew up near the beach, and yeah, I miss it. It is very healing. And do you have a final thought you'd like to leave with our listeners today?
I would love to leave listeners with this thought, and that is that the way through what I have learned over the past year, through health challenges and the pandemic and all of that, what I have learned is really about embracing the darkness along with the light, and living with fear, for example, that it gets a seat, but maybe in the car, if that's our metaphor, but it doesn't get to drive. That it really is the only way through to feeling full joy is also embracing that darkness. And Brene Brown, of course, is the ultimate teacher of this philosophy, but I have learned it in a completely new way this year.
Thank you for sharing that, and thank you so much for being our guest today on the Ellevate podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks so much for listening to Ellevate. If you like what you hear, help a girl out. Subscribe to the Ellevate podcast on iTunes, give us 5 stars, and share your review. Also, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at EllevateNTWK, that's Ellevate Network, and become a member. You can learn all about membership and all the great things that Ellevate Network is doing at our website, www.ellevatenetwork.com. That's ELLEVATE network.com. And special thanks to our producer, Catherine Heller. She rocks. And to our voiceover artist, Rachel Griesinger. Thanks so much, and join us next week.
92% of households that start the year with Peloton are still active a year later.
92% because of a bike?
Not just bikes. We also make treadmills and rowers.
Oh, let me guess, for elite athletes only, right?
Nope. It doesn't matter if you're an avid exerciser or new to working out. Peloton can help you achieve your fitness goals. 92% stick with it. So can you. Try Peloton bikes, tread, or row risk-free with a 30-day home trial. New members only. Not available in remote locations. See additional terms at onepeloton.com/home-trial.